Units heading up to the code 3 chase. Suspect was last reported southbound on Highway 99.
Can you give me more info on that call?
Greetings. Welcome to Cop to Corporate. I'm Brian Tuscan, your host, and our special guest today is Carmen Best, who recently retired as the Chief of Police for the city of Seattle. But before we start, at the time of this recording, I want to wish everyone there, law enforcement professionals, the best. This is National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. And I want to thank Carmen and the men and women in law enforcement for all that you do to protect us. So Carmen has an amazing public service career. She started in the U.S. Army, in the military, enlisted, spent about 3 years there, left, worked a short time in an insurance company, and then wanted to become a police officer. She spent 30 years in law enforcement with the Seattle Police Department. And from an education perspective, she has a Bachelor's of Arts from Western Illinois University. She's a graduate of the FBI National Academy. She recently got her Master's of Science in Criminal Justice from Northeastern University. And I'm sure you have seen her on the news. She's a contributor to NBC News today, along with other news stations, to talk about insights on policing and leadership. And she recently joined Axon's AI Ethics Board. So she promotes responsible development of AI technologies. And I believe Axon is part of the Taser company. So little on Carmen's Seattle police career. She rose through the ranks from a beat cop to a patrol sergeant to running narcotics operations, robbery, gang, fugitive task forces. Then she went to the executive track as an assistant chief, deputy chief, then to an interim chief, and then becoming the chief of police about 3 years ago. So she spent almost 3 years as the chief of police. She's very respected. I have a lot of friends in Seattle Police, speak very highly of Carmen. And when she announced her retirement, I saw it on the news and on social media. It was such an amazing send-off. It seemed hundreds or even thousands of officers lined the streets of Seattle to wish her a fond farewell. So the goal of this interview is to dive into Carmen's journey from cop to corporate. And without further ado, Carmen Best, tell us your story.
Well, first, good morning, Brian, and thank you so much. I feel so honored to be on your program. People absolutely love it, and I'm just grateful that I got the opportunity to be here. And also, thank you for acknowledging Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, because certainly in these trying times where law enforcement seems to be the target of so much scrutiny, it's great that we have this day set aside where we can reflect and appreciate the sacrifice of the men and women in the law enforcement profession. So thank you for acknowledging that.
So thanks, Carmen. Why don't you tell our listeners here, when did you start planning for retirement and what steps did you take? Are there any insights you could share as an executive? We have a lot of executive law enforcement that sit in the captain and above ranks.
Yeah, Brian, I can say this. I talked to many chiefs, obviously, as I was learning and getting into the job. And many of them had retired or were close to retirement. And here's one of the things I learned. You really start planning right from the beginning. Your legacy starts the day you take the job. And part of that legacy is, here's the goals I want to achieve. Here's the things I want to do. And here's the options I will have for when I move on. Because as you know, we have a window of time to do the work. And you have to know that. And then after that, what's next? So I really wanted to achieve some goals, didn't know how long I would be there, and started thinking about, always thinking about the future and how I might have an impact later on, or how I might do other things later on. I just believe in continuous improvement and innovation. And part of that means planning for not only your professional future, but, personally, how you're gonna move up and move on. So right from the beginning, just learning about, what options were out there, talking to other chiefs who retired like you're doing to me, and finding out, what they'd done. Some had gone into consulting and private practice. Others had, decided they were going to work for nonprofits. Many folks, after they retire, look at other things. And many had gone on to the corporate sector and found gratification in that role and in that job. So not outing anybody, so to speak, about where they've gone, but just learning that there are other options, that your life doesn't stop at being a police chief or executive. And in fact, police chiefs and executives really are quite transferable to the corporate world and the private sector, because you've learned so many skills. You're balancing political and internal and stakeholders and community and unions and all of the things that you have to manage when you're in that executive position. And that transfers, believe it or not, quite easily into the corporate sector on the leadership part and the working with people part and the dealing with putting out fires every day. Now, there are those other issues that I found because I'm working for a very large private sector company, with hundreds of thousands of employees, and I handle their largest global account that spans the globe, global. And so doing that, I've learned a lot. The biggest thing, believe it or not, was just understanding, one, the culture, and two, the language, because clearly we have all of our acronyms in policing. It's like when I went from the military to the police, and in the military it's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and the police is Adam, Boy, Charles. And so you have to learn the acronyms and the language and what they mean. And so that part is always a challenge. But once you get that piece of it, you'll find that it can be a pretty smooth transition. It's different, but it definitely can be rewarding. Your input on and your contribution to the advancement of your employees, to the advancement of the organization and the company, it can be very meaningful.
So Carmen, as you talk about the transferable skills as you learned as an executive in public safety, could you talk about how you've seen it was beneficial in your current role in the corporate sector?
Yeah, certainly. So some of the things that I think transferred quite easily was any position that I had within the organization. I always went in and just took some time to absorb what was going on, to understand what the procedures were for that particular unit, doing some auditing of just the lay of the land. Not coming in right away trying to, shake up the world, but really understanding the environment and the people within that environment. And I found that's always been helpful, whether I was going from operations lieutenant to a captain of a precinct to a deputy chief or even the chief. You do the audit, understand, absorb the environment. And that's the same thing in the corporate sector. So I came in, I started, reading the contracts and talking to people and understanding what their issues and concerns were, both for the client and for the employees right around me. Same thing I've done in the public sector, and that really gives you a basis from which to start, formulating some thoughts about how you might improve and move things along, determining, which employees maybe aren't appreciated or undervalued, and which may need, some encouragement for growth. And so those types of things are just transferred very easily. Being able to make decisions when you have to, quickly on the fly is also important, but also making sure that you're including, to the degree that you can, others in the decision-making process and really showing that value. Those things are not unique to public sector or private sector. They really transfer very easily. And anybody who's been successful in the public sector has those qualities, and they transfer smoothly over to the corporate world.
Well, it seems like your transition from public safety for so many years to the private sector has been very smooth, and it just shows your thoughtfulness and intentional review of what you need to do to be successful. So let's kind of go back in time a little when you did retire from Seattle, and it was somewhat of a challenging time for you. But I want to talk about the day you decided to retire, or you announced your retirement. Up until your retirement, I saw an amazing show of support for you from the men and women in blue, from the Seattle Police Department and the surrounding area law enforcement And I've had officers I know very well from Honolulu police. So, 2,700 miles away saying, wish Carmen the best. And so tell us about, was it emotional? How did you go through that process?
It was very emotional. But once I decided that, it was the right time, there's a whole host of reasons that went into that, which I don't need to discover or disclose, here. But, once I decided that it was time to go and made that announcement, I have to tell you, it was really heartwarming, the way people acknowledged it and acknowledged me. And so many things that were good, so many letters and cards and flowers and coming into the office every day. It looked like a florist shop. And I love flowers, so it was great. So there were flowers everywhere. There were stacks of cards and well wishes. And it was a very heartwarming because after, almost 30 years, it's good to know that somebody appreciated and valued the literal sacrifice. It was, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I felt very valued. That one of the best events, too, actually, was my security detail, who I was very, very close to. They were with me all of the time, public events, private events, all of that. So of course I was very close to my detail, and they wanted to take me to breakfast, on my last day. So we went to breakfast, and then we, they were driving me back to town, and they were taking this sort of circuitous route. And I was thinking to myself, why the heck are they taking so long to get me back to the headquarters? But what I didn't know was that they knew that there was essentially a farewell, I won't say parade, but a group of officers that were standing there in front of the building. So as we were approaching, we were headed southbound on Fifth Avenue toward headquarters. I could see all these flashing lights. And in my mind, I was thinking, somebody called in a bomb threat to the to the building. What the heck, And so we get closer, and I realize the streets on both sides were lined with officers there to wish me farewell. Officers, civilian staff, administrative people, the fire chief. So many folks that I had, interacted with over the years were standing there, and it was breathtaking in many ways to take in, but also very emotional for me. Tears came to my eyes, but I didn't actually cry. And one of my detail guys, he goes, I thought, because they know me, they said, we're going to make her cry today. So they almost got it, but I didn't quite do it. But it was wonderful. They saluted me. I knew so many of them personally. I'd been there almost 30 years, so I'd met their families and dealt with them on a number of different issues. So it really was like my second family, honoring me. And it was so very touching. I really can't tell you how touching it was. That is up there with one of the best things that I've experienced. Obviously having my kids and all that, it was, top, but it's right up there. It was really quite something. And I will always fondly remember that and look back at those days.
Well, that's such a great story to wrap up such an amazing career, Carmen. So as you had just retired about 5 months ago, are successfully in the private sector, you have, contributing work on news stations as a retired police chief, providing insights on police and police reform and strategy and leadership. I can only imagine your phone is just ringing off the hook. It may be not to give any details of who's calling, but how do you prepare yourself for other opportunities out there as a retired police executive? Opportunities from coaching and speaking, just so you could help other law enforcement executives prepare.
Well, it's exactly that. I literally do, a number of speaking events, and I honestly just tell my story. It's not even hard to do. I don't have to do an amazing amount of preparation. I just tell them, things that I've learned over the years, and I want to share that with others. Some of the key points are like having a good mentor, having sponsors, having allies, and, distinguishing between all of those things. It's not only is it important to have a good mentor and mentors. It's also important to be a mentor to others coming up behind you to make sure that they learn from you. having allies, people who, like I will say, my former chief, Bill Kurlikowski, always has been in my corner, even though we are literally on different sides of the country. And but always a person who advocates on my behalf and is willing to tell stories about his confidence in me. And then having a sponsor. And for me, that was Chief Kathleen O'Toole. She took me under her wing. She made me a deputy chief when I was pretty surprised, like, you want me to be the deputy chief? But yeah, she did. And she really helped because of her incredible accolades and career, her credibility. She really sort of lent that to me. I was able to meet with and talk with so many people that knew her, and she always brought me in, and we were really attached by the hip for so very long. So I learned a lot. So when I first became deputy chief, didn't have any aspirations to be the chief, but by the time she had worked with me and we'd been so close, I knew I was ready, and I think that that's important, that we not only, learn from others, but we pass that along to others and make sure that we are able to have succession training, bring people under, sponsor people when we can, and be good mentors and have good mentors in our life. And I still have great mentors, both in the private sector, people who've been successful, people who, have helped me, and the public sector too. So all of that has been really wonderful. And those are things that I think everyone should look to others. No one is successful on their own. You just aren't. You need to work with others, and you need to help others.
Well, thank you so much, Carmen, for being on the Cop to Corporate show. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have gained very good insight to how you've prepared your career to the private sector. And the last point you made on having good coaches, mentors, and sponsors, and not doing it alone. And it's just such great advice. So for those of you that aren't connected with me on LinkedIn, please connect with me, connect with Carmen on LinkedIn, and also subscribe to the Cop to Corporate podcast on YouTube. And I wish all of the listeners on Cop to Corporate the best. I wish Carmen the best, who is the best.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.